welcome back. Segment 2 today, we are talking about, talking with Dr. Liz Royle about building emotional resilience and creating effective human recovery processes for crisis situations. Dr. Liz, great first segment there. Lots of stuff. And as I said at the end, we didn't even touch on our agenda yet. So, so lots of good information here. I'd like to start off segment 2, taking the next step that there, because we talked about staff and everybody kind of being the same, we're all human. Mm-hmm. There are some strategies that organizations can leverage to support staff. And I know in your speech, you had a couple of, you called them the 3 R's, I believe it was. So can you talk about those?
Okay, yep. So the 3 R's are a little model by Kaminsky, which is the resistance, resilience, and recovery. And for me, it's a really nice way of looking at how do we make the most effective strategy for our organization. So resistance is the ability to encounter a really difficult or traumatic event and actually not be affected by it. Resilience is about the bounce back, so being affected, but then the bounce back. And recovery is when there's been a bigger impact and then how we move on. So the way I quite often like to describe it to people is if you imagine you've got medical staff in an acute environment, so the ER, emergency room, accident emergency, and the kind of things that they deal with day in, day out, most people would find really difficult. You know, if they just put potentially me or you in that setting and said, right, just, get on with what needs doing, I think we'd both find it quite traumatic. And yet they do this day in, and this is their resistance. And that comes from having a sense of, I know what I'm doing. I've got a job to do, so I can focus on that. I've got people around me in my team who are supportive and we're working as a team. Hopefully the organisation supports me, and I've got this sense of efficacy. And that is really protective. That's the resistance that allows them to do that. Now, having said that, occasionally there'll be a really difficult time, difficult shift, difficult day or night. Something happens and they feel like, oh, that was a tough one. I'm going to take a couple of days. I'm going to take a week or so just to process that, just to calm down from it, just to make sense of it. But I can do things to help myself. And I've got the team around me who, we recognize yes, this feels really bad, but we're resilient. And this is the resilience phase. Now, over and above that, there might be an incident that happens that really gets under their resilience. It really gets under their body armor, the psychological body armor, and it absolutely psychologically floors them. They can't make sense of it. It's going round the head all the time. They just can't move on. They're not settling down, and they actually, even a couple of weeks later, 4 weeks later, months, years later, they've still not recovered from it. And that's the recovery phase when we need to start looking at actually getting more of the psychotherapists, the psychologists working to help that person in the recovery. So what we find is a lot of organizations either don't think about resistance or they just take it for granted. I think we're finding more of them looking at things like leadership and morale. That is all really helpful. But, making sure that staff feel equipped to do what they do, new staff particularly. So checking that we've got as much resistance in place. Then making sure that we work with the resilience, giving people the skills that they can recognize, oh, actually, that did bother me. And what can I do to help myself? And what can I do to help my colleagues? And what can my family do to support me? That tends to be missing, and organizations just go straight to, oh, you need to get the counselors in, you need to get the therapists, which is the recovery phase. So if you think about almost like a funnel, where you're funneling people through according to the need, we're just saying to everybody, oh, just go right the way through and, get the top level of care, even if you don't need it, or and what people will think is, well, I don't think I need that, so they won't get anything. And so that looking at it in the resistance, resilience, recovery framework means that we're providing that continuum of care, if that makes sense.
Hmm. I have a couple of questions
Okay.
based on that.
Mhm.
You mentioned a couple of times about team.
Mm.
How much contribution is there to emotional resilience and using the resistance, resilience, recovery phase is
Mm.
team, having a work colleague or a friend
Mm.
or a family member or
Yeah.
somebody to talk to. How important is that?
It's
Because I was,
huge.
it seemed as though
Yeah.
it was important to
Yeah,
you.
it's huge. I mean, if you think about it, you spend more time with the people at work quite often than you do with family. And if they're not good relationships and you don't feel supported, then that's really isolating. But also, our colleagues, our peers are sometimes the ones who actually say to us, "Are you okay? You don't seem yourself." They pick up sometimes on things that we've been denying or we've been avoiding. And so they can make a massive amount of difference in terms of how safe we feel in the workplace, emotionally. But the other side of it is when we go home, our family, our support networks outside of work can have a big impact as well. And quite often we don't do anything to help them to help somebody who's been psychologically hurt at work. And so somebody might come home, and this is a really classic example. Um, Somebody who I was speaking to a couple of years ago, and he'd been through a terror attack at work, and he had post traumatic stress disorder from it, and he'd been really quite badly affected. But he said to me, he said, "Do you know, one of the hardest things was my mum kept asking, she kept coming to me and saying, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to help, how to help you." And he said her pain and her helplessness actually was really, really difficult for him. And
Mm,
if we can just give people some simple advice of how do you help your loved ones? How do you help the people around you? That kind of dynamic is less likely to happen. She would have been traumatized by the fact that she couldn't help her child, grown up
mhm,
child, but still a child. And he so you've got this sort of really horrible dynamic where people, for the lack of education, are in very, very difficult, dark places. And
mhm.
so we can make a big difference just by saying to people, if you want to help that person, these are some simple tips to help you do it, and just giving them that reassurance and taking that fear away. But also, these are the signs to watch out for, and these are the things that you do need to worry about and involve a mental health professional. And that's particularly pertinent with things like suicide. That people, don't know whether, what to say if they suspect that somebody's feeling so low. So it is just about giving them that education that they can be helpful, because we're surrounded by people who want to help us at times like that. But with trauma and crisis, the natural response is to withdraw and to disconnect. And that's part of the human survival response. So we've got to try and engage people.
I talked with someone a long time ago, and they said one of the, and I'm just kind of curious to your
Mhm.
thoughts here. They said one of the best things you can just do in those kind of situations is just say, "I'm here for you."
Yeah, yeah. I, I would agree with that. But you'd be surprised how many people don't feel able to say that, or don't know how to follow it up if that person does start to talk.
Hmm.
Or doesn't know how to, what kind of things they could suggest. Sometimes there's some simple actions that people can take to encourage them in their own recovery, can make a big difference. It's not all about talking. So talking, it has its place, but in the very early days, talking too much can actually be quite harmful. It can
Hmm.
stop the memories from actually being processed and filed away.
The other question that came to mind is,
Mhm.
I don't think, if I'm understanding correctly, I don't think it's right that we treat everybody the same. Everyone's going to feel differently,
Yeah.
even if the situation might be the same. They're
Yes.
going to feel different because
Yeah.
your point you made earlier on is a lot of organizations will just say we'll activate our employee assistance program and push
Yeah.
everybody there.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, well, then you're just kind of treating everybody the same.
Mm.
But in
Yeah.
an office, you can have an active shooter. You can have
Mm.
an envelope with suspicious powder in it. You can
Mm.
have
Mm.
a fire, a flood. You can have someone
Mm.
call in with a bomb threat, and that's going to
Yeah.
traumatize people
Mm.
overall. And you've
Mm.
got hopefully plans and response plans in place
Yeah.
for some of that stuff, but people are still going to be traumatized by it in different ways.
Mm. Yeah, and equally, some people may not be. And this is one of the other things that, we they may it's a lot of it's down to interpretation. There are so many complex factors as to why something would affect an individual. And but that person who's not affected that time may be feeling helpless around the others, maybe feeling out of step because everyone is saying to them, you must be really, affected by this. And they're
Mhm.
thinking, actually, no, I'm okay. And so they then start to feel like, oh, there's something wrong with me. Maybe I'm not, maybe I'm a psychopath. All these kind of things I've heard, you know, and then so for the sake of having education about, the common reactions and give them a role in helping their colleagues, bring the team together, um, and let people understand about different ways of reacting. So you might have somebody who wants to talk, and you might have somebody who wants to withdraw. And if they don't understand that each of those coping strategies is absolutely fine, you can find that they're then at odds with each other. And you've got some kind of tension within the team.
Mhm.
So, understanding those kind of things is important.
You got me thinking about how different people respond differently
Hmm.
and how you talk with people. And some people how they respond in situations. They just go with the flow, or they're
Mm,
hiding how they feel, or like you said,
mm,
shouldn't I be feeling like these other people?
yeah,
It got me
yeah.
thinking about people that are on some of those crisis management teams and
Mm,
leadership.
mm,
They're it's got to be a challenge for them because they are going to be feeling some of those same feelings as
mm,
everyone else feels,
yeah.
but they have to, in a way, uh, I don't think the right word is hide,
Mm,
their fears, but they have to step above them
mm.
because they have to provide comfort to others. That's got to be a challenge too.
It is, and one of the things working with major incidents is your sort of your high level staff who are actually dealing with everything, whether it's your C-suite or your gold and silver controls. They have to get on with the job. So in some ways, that is protective, that they're focusing on the job, they're focusing on what they can do. But then afterwards, it can be something that really hits them, and that's when all the support is gone. And they are then feeling as though they can't ask for any support. They should be the strong ones, or they weren't directly involved. So when you're looking at strategy, it's always looking about, actually, it's not just about people who are directly impacted. It's looking at the ripple effect of throwing a stone into the water. Where is that ripple effect going, and how do I make sure that everybody has got what they need at the level they need it and at the time they need it? And it's making sure that is all covered in your strategy.
I like what you just mentioned, the ripple effect.
Mm.
During your session at BCI, I was sitting at the table with your business partner.
Okay.
So, and I want to show the graphic because as I was talking with her,
Hmm.
she showed, and I don't know if you can see the
Hmm.
here,
Yeah.
your look here, and then the ripples.
Yeah.
Look how that impacts different groups and stakeholders,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
and leadership who are on a crisis management team have to do
Mm.
that as well, right?
Mm. Mm. Yeah. And I think it's about looking at what are their needs, what are their needs now, what are their needs in the unfolding day, because the ripple carries on rippling. And sometimes what all they need is somebody to check in and say, actually, how are you doing? And are you, while she's dealing with this incident, are you eating? Are you having some downtime? Have you got somebody to talk to? Can you get some exercise in place just to help burn off some of these, stress hormones, and just being very practical. And then when they come to the end of actually they've dealt with it, okay, now what? Now what do you need? What do you need to make sense of this? What do you need to move on from it? And, actually, sort of recover from it.
Mhm. I like how you mentioned, with the ripple effects, that people that are in leadership, they have to look at some of this stuff too. They can't turn it off, so to speak. And
Yeah,
even though they may step up and show leadership and strength, that
yeah,
doesn't mean that she's not going to feel something later on
yeah.
when reality sets in.
That's it. Yeah, they are still human, surprisingly.
Yeah.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
are they are they are still human, and they will be impacted in different ways. And you might have one person who thinks, actually, do you know, that was a really challenging situation, but I did a good job and I'm proud of what I did there. And they come through that and, it with that sense. But you may get somebody else who, for many, many different reasons, they may have done this many times before, but this particular one has just got under the surface a little bit.
Mhm.
And when they think about it now, still feels quite upsetting. They avoid thinking about it. So it's suppressed, but
Yeah.
suppressed emotions have a habit of leaking out, and that doesn't tend to be a healthy thing. They can leak out in physical symptoms, they can leak out in relationship breakdowns, alcohol abuse, and just a poor quality of life. And that's not what we want, for
Yeah.
anybody.
Yeah. On that note, we've come to the end of our second segment. We are
Okay.
talking with Dr. Liz Royle today on building emotional resilience and creating effective human recovery processes for crisis situations. And we will be right back. If you like that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.